It allowed me to write the last word on the idea of diffusion. The US, of course, it's a doctrinal country. They have a national security strategy, national defense strategy. They can rightly place it in a document. We can't. I leave some of the bills that are pending in the US Congress on Indian Ocean.
I see. Welcome to a new episode of Books and Banter, a Dialogues Digital original series. We have with us today Dr. Vivek Mishra, who is a Deputy Director of Strategic Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. Previously, he's worked at the Indian Council of World Affairs. He's also been an assistant professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Calcutta and a Fulbright Nehru visiting scholarship at Columbia University. Welcome to the show, Vivek. So we are going to discuss today your book on American Maritime Strategy in the Indian Ocean, Dominance, Diffusion and Adaptation. Congratulations on the publication.
Thank you.
Let's start by discussing that how did your academic interests evolve towards maritime geopolitics and Indian Ocean?
Well, thank you for having me, Portia. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about the book. Also my journey. I think what's important in my case is that Indian Ocean back in my PhD was an emerging domain. Indo-Pacific was not so much in the discourse.
Right.
It was increasingly because of China, because of India's own assertion. It was becoming a space that was important. At least my sense was that I should pick up a topic that has a shelf life, not just from a value proposition perspective, but also from a scholarly perspective.
Right.
And I think that in my estimation of Indian Ocean as a space, in that regard, I have certainly made probably a good decision, in the sense that Indian Ocean, as you know, is right in the thick of things. As if you talk about supply chains, if you talk about geopolitics, if you talk about balance of power, trade power competition, it's all there. And my book refers to the fact that it was always there.
Right.
So I think from that perspective, Indian Ocean and now increasingly the Indo-Pacific is an important space. But now we are probably at the cusp of a change in that discourse and imagination. There's always been, this geography has always seen reimagination by even as powers assert themselves in the region. And now with the Trumpian recession of power, you will see a different mix of power balance emerging in this region. And I think we are at the cusp of that change.
Thank you for that background, Vivek. Scholars usually take up either continental geopolitics or naval power. You have converged these two areas of studies. So if you could share some of the compelling factors as to how this thought came across to converge the two.
So I think one was, of course, there was a sense of history with Indian Ocean. There's been various works on Indian Ocean. Important, if you go to the Mahanian lens, there have been people who've looked at this region from a purely geostrategic and geopolitical perspectives. And then there's also the history of migration and people. There's been a series of books on this geography by people who've tracked migration and the emergence of different people around the littorals of Indian Ocean. And then, of course, you have the supply chain angle, the chip angle, and so on and so forth. You have a great reassertion of the Middle East in a different aspect. I think all of these sort of combined in my thought in terms of how this region is now different from the past.
Right.
And while history is important, and my book refers, at least my first chapter refers to history in great detail, but I think gradually what it does differently is track down the US presence in this region. And I think the United States has always been my interest as a scholar in terms of how it operates in this region. But what I'm more concerned about through this book is a Delhi-centric perspective.
Right.
And not a Washington. And we've had historians write about US role in the Indian Ocean, right from Robert Kaplan and others. But I think what I was trying to do is, where is Delhi in this how do we, or how should we view this region, when great powers role is concerned, but more primarily when your own power metrics are changing. Right. So that inverts, that changes a lot of dynamics in this region. I think that sort of pushed me to coalesce history as well as strategy, as well as a futuristic sort of geopolitics, which is shifting to supply chains and other issues like that.
I mean, well done on the unique approach. I'm sure it must have taken long research phases for you to identify the gap in the literature, and to be a young scholar and to figure out that the gap is there. Congratulations on that. The title itself, Dominance, Diffusion and Adaptation, suggests a historical evolution. So at what point did you realize that these three phases could become an organizing framework for a book?
So, that's a brilliant question, in the sense that we always see United States as a dominant force, which it is. But I think there are phases. For example, 2008, as I've marked in the book, is certainly 2008 to 10 is the period when you see a great degree of belligerence from China, albeit most of these is restricted to the east of Malacca Strait. Nonetheless, you can see the reverberations of those actions in the Indian Ocean.
Right.
And I think so the first decade of the 21st century is critical, in the sense you see the United States realizing for the first time that they cannot do it alone, right? And then there is a series of changes in US policy. You have Hillary Clinton writing a foreign affairs article on pivot to Asia. And then you have then they realized they overstepped with it. They went wrong with it. And then came the rebalance strategy. And then came the Indo-Pacific strategy, which again is now in a churn.
Right.
So I think all of these phases are the first decade of the 21st century is really remarkable in terms of how US positioning in this area has changed considerably. And I thought that this was also in the first couple of years of this century, it was also the period when I started reading literature around this, and I thought it would be worthwhile to pick this and take a deep dive into this.
Your analysis combines naval strategy, geopolitics, diplomacy, and also economic connectivity. How difficult would you say, or challenging rather, was methodologically wise to integrate these diverse dimensions into one setup?
It's always challenging for a civilian scholar to go into strategy of the US Navy. But the good thing and the positive thing was the fact that there was a lot of literature and people available than I expected. And I think that made my job easier, in the sense that there were people ready to talk. There were people literally who served in the Navy, actually were willing to talk about nitty-gritties of this. And thankfully, one of the most highly decorated naval officers of the UK actually agreed to review my thesis. So I think I got great feedback in terms of where I am. And needless to say, as all scholars, we've faced our first draft is never the one that goes
Absolutely.
to, it's also telling in many respects of where you improve, how you write, the vessel names, the ship vessel names, and so on and so forth. It was a long period of training, but I think I got exposed to the right literature and the right libraries. I think at Columbia also there was Gary Sick, who's served in the Navy, who's also being deployed in Iran for some time, was offering a course, and I was that's just one example of, and I took that course. It was very, very enriching to do that. So I think things like those, methodology had to be your rigor of your libraries and research and scholarly approach had to be combined with the idea of practitioner's approach. I have substantively cut down on the quantitative analysis in the book part, primarily because of tables and so on, and the publishers and editors' feedback and so on and so forth. But the original draft actually has a lot of quantitative analysis as well.
Having been a IR scholar myself, the fact that you took up to write on another country who's obviously a major power and also got a review from another major country, you wrote on US being an Indian and got a review from the UK. I think you've covered a sufficient amount of the participants of the great competition to comment on your book, which is a very holistic perspective, I'm guessing, and well done on that.
No, I think I was fortunate to be able to do that, because I think just the fact that somebody agreed to go through your draft word by word was actually very, very I was humbled by that.
It must have been very encouraging.
Yeah, it was. I mean, as a scholar who's just writing his first draft, it was very enriching, and that pushed me actually to take this to a logical end in the form of a book.
So from that, coming to various reviews and critical reflections that has happened in the public domain, reviews have argued that your book's strongest empirical focus lies in the post-Cold War and early 2000s, while the later Indo-Pacific phase receives comparatively less attention. How do you respond to such critiques? Yeah,
so deliberately, it was a conscious choice of ending, this book around 2020, 2021, something like that, because one is, of course, I wanted to see the diffusion part in a follow-up volume. So I had to stop that and not tinker with it too much. Plus, the other thing was that suddenly with the Trump administration, when I was submitting this draft, the Trump administration was campaigning, and so there were signs of a great degree of churn that would come in the Indo-Pacific, which it has to my mind. Not just because Quad hasn't happened, but I think because of a lot of other reasons. There is, if you sense the domestic impulse in the US, there is a great degree of recession in the sense that in mindset, in geopositioning. So I think those call for a different analysis, framework, book, and so on and so forth. So I stopped around the 2020, 2021, because it allowed me to write the last word on the idea of diffusion, which can then be carried on in a follow-up volume. But what I primarily wanted to do with this volume is give the dominance part and the diffusion part. And adaptation, of course, is something that's still going on. So it could be again sort of weaved into another compilation. So my idea really was to project the dominant part in a big way, and then show how it has adapted, or how it is poised to adapt. I think that was my approach in the book.
From an academic perspective, some scholars have contended that the Indo-Pacific construct is primarily a geopolitical narrative designed to contain China. How do you see the Indo-Pacific as a genuine strategic reorientation more than a diplomatic framing exercise?
I do sense that, my point on Indo-Pacific is that it is an important not just a construct, but I think it is an important strategy. Although we, as for India, we don't follow a doctrine or a strategy, but I think it's, in India's view, it's a vision. So Indo-Pacific has been framed as a doctrine, as a strategy, as a vision. I think for India, the vision part comes the closest. For the US, of course, it's a doctrinal country. They have a national security strategy, national defense strategy. They can rightly place it in a document. We can't, and we don't want to, right? So from that perspective, I think Indo-Pacific means two different things for US and India, and I think that's why you also see the difference when they talk about Indo-Pacific. When the Quad comes together, for a long time there was a criticism that India is the weakest link. In fact, the truth was just the opposite. But the idea is that because we come from two very different worlds, but we do have convergences on the idea of China. We do have convergences on the idea of freedom of navigation. We do have convergences on the idea that this region should be free for all. But India added the word inclusive, that any country that wants to play by the rules are welcome on board. And I think that should be the spirit
Significant
of
difference, yeah.
that should be the, and we see the United States gradually moving towards that definition.
Right.
You know, when you remember, the United States once defined the Indo-Pacific as Bollywood to Hollywood. Then they realized, oh, we missed the Western Indian Ocean,
Yeah.
right? And then they course corrected and said, well, the Western Indian Ocean is as much a part. So we do see that India's positioning is much more holistic, inclusive, and comprehensive. And I think that is where we stand, and that is where I stand personally on the idea of Indo-Pacific.
Coming to the impact of the book, as an author, what kind of response that has surprised you the most this far?
Well, I thought this would be mostly an academic work, it's an academic work, but I thought the readership would be limited to academia. But I see a lot of other people picking this up.
I think it's massively picked up by the policy section.
I think it is picked up. I also went to Pune, I did a book talk, and the kind of response that I got was really amazing. There's another one lined up in June in Bangalore. So I think people, in universities, think tanks, and policy circles.
I think even in the government circles, I think the topic is such which is very timely, and it would be picked up across industries to understand, because it gives both a historical perspective and academic perspective, and it can shape policies in very way. It can give ideas to that. Yeah,
I'm glad you say that, because towards the end of the book, I leave some of the bills that are pending in the US Congress on Indian Ocean.
I see. Okay.
So I've referred to them. They might very well become laws and shape policies of the US government. So right now they're in Congress. It depends on which presidency comes and how they approach the Indian Ocean.
So looking back, did any of these debates around the Indo-Pacific evolve in ways that validated your core arguments?
Quite a few. I think first, of course, is the fact that there is great power competition that is playing, and US has had to adapt. But the adaptation part also surprised me, and that's why I had to stop the volume at a certain year, because the adaptation part was something beyond my imagination, beyond I think all of our imaginations. We did not expect the Trump administration to take approach to the Indo-Pacific. He has completely relegated the Indo-Pacific in terms of priority to the Western Western Hemisphere.
Okay.
His entire focus is on the Western Hemisphere, which includes the Arctic, the Canada, and South America.
Right.
That's Western Hemisphere. And then, of course, his focus is on the Middle East. These two geographies have eaten Trump administration's large focus
since the time
ballast.
they've come.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of priority, then the Indo-Pacific falls on the shoulders of the countries of the region.
Right.
And that's why you see a great degree of scramble between Japan, Australia, and India. In terms of the areas are subsea cables, supply chains, energy, infrastructure connectivity. Biden tried a lot to create this pool of money in the Indo-Pacific through IPEF and Blue Dot Network and other, which would counter the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
But all of that has been reversed by the Trump administration's approach. And I'm not blaming the United States, but I think we've from India, including our foreign minister, they've enunciated that we understand from where America is coming, but it is that positioning is coming at a cost for regional countries, and I think that is, for India, it's particularly concerning because it abruptly disrupts your growth trajectory.
Massive structural changes will have impact in the long term.
So I think that bigger change will reflect on your economy, will reflect on everything else that you're doing. And remember, just for a reference, China, when it opened the economy in 1970s, for 3.5 decades, it did not have the kind of crises that we see now, impacting its supply chains.
I see. Okay.
And that's the difference. That when you are growing at 7.5, 7.8%, then there are crises all around disrupting your supply chains, like the other power was never tested.
Right. So if you had to identify one key takeaway that you hope that your readers would retain after reading that book, what would it be?
I would, there was a great degree of theory in the Indian Ocean. That there was a power vacuum when the British left in 1967 and handed the baton over to the US, right? The whole Diego Garcia question, and it's coming back once again. I think my book subtly argues that there was no power vacuum. In fact, there were coordinated recce's between the US and the UK in the Indian Ocean to identify islands on where the base would be created, and then finally Diego Garcia is identified, and the United States takes that baton from the UK, and the UK had tremendous pressure on the pound sterling. It was falling because of global pressures, and there were anti-colonial movements all across against the UK, so there were all kinds of pressure. But my book subtly argues that the power vacuum theory of the Indian Ocean, that the British left and then the Americans came in between, there was a power vacuum. There wasn't a power vacuum. I think that's one key takeaway. I think many readers
have pointed
out that this is a credible gap that was filled.
Looking at a more futuristic direction, do you feel there was any particular theme in your book that needed a dedicated follow-up in the coming times?
Oh, absolutely. I think towards the end, when I'm talking about adaptation, I think that story is half-baked. Not because
perhaps Quad or
so not just because you need to finish a book and you not go on, but also because the kind of changes and the timing of my research also pointed to the idea that there was some degree of predictability until the Biden administration, so you could weave that narrative into one strand,
right,
and then take the adaptation part in a second volume, which then talks about the disruption part of the whole strategy, and I think that is something that stands out in my mind.
Given the recent geopolitical shifts, do you think the next phase for after adaptation could involve fragmentation or competitive block building in the Indian Ocean?
I think both. It's fragmentation, yes, absolutely. You're going to see fragmentation in terms of powers fragmenting, in terms of states' powers fragmenting, because you will have new leverages grown with other countries. And in terms of the ability of the countries to reassert themselves in this Indian Ocean, in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific is going to completely change, because you have a massive power like the United States completely reorienting, and it all depends on what kind of grand bargain does the United States achieve with China.
Yes,
that will really impact the Indo-Pacific in a new way. Both in terms of supply chain economics, also in terms of geostrategy and geopositioning. Meanwhile, what also is an outlier is your own capacity in terms of military power and hard balancing in the Indian Ocean. And I think if you combine those two or three things, then we'll have a mix of adaptation that could combine rupture, bit of stability, and grand strategy of a different kind than we have seen in the past.
What emerging developments in the Indian Ocean should scholars and policymakers focus on today, if you had to give one or two ideas?
I think 2 or 3 ideas would be one. A key area to watch is subsea cables. It's an emerging area. India and Australia are doing a great degree of coordination here, and not just because of your own necessity of that capability, but I think the counter capabilities have gone much ahead than your capabilities, which is China is the only country which has the capability to destroy. So they have autonomous underwater vehicles which can destroy your subsea cables, right? So if countries develop counterproductive machinations like this, then you've got to have your capability in the right place. So I think that is an emerging area that I think will be keenly watched, because they are the bedrocks of everything. The internet, the light, subsea cables are so important. Data, and India is going to be the one of the largest hubs for data centers in the next 10. So you'll be hinged to that idea. The second is, of course, critical minerals.
Right.
And how they move in the Indo-Pacific domain. I think Pax Silica was a good initiative, but whether this can be sustained is a question, right? You have a host of initiatives by the Trump administration, but sustaining that is a question, because the reason I say this is because there was, as I said, the Biden administration did a slew of economic initiatives which they could not sustain, also because of their own limitations, but also because a different administration came and changed the approach. So
Right.
I think initiatives are great, but critical minerals, subsea cables are going to be very important in the Indo-Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific domain, which will guarantee or shape the kind of mechanisms that you adopt.
Right.
To shape the sea lines of the freedom of sea lines
Freedom
of
of sea
communication. So initially we talked about sea lines of communication, their security in a completely hard power manner, and I think now you're seeing a subtle change in terms of how sea lines of communication are important, but there are additional layers to why they are important.
Last question, and more on a personal note, having gone through this extensive intellectual journey, what continues to excite you as an author today?
I think the funny part of being a researcher of America is that you have Trump as a president, and I think every morning my research starts with a Truth Social read.
Right.
But on a serious note, I think America continues to be important.
Yeah.
It is far ahead of China still in terms of military power.
Correct.
Its defense budget is 1.5 trillion. Most countries wouldn't have the budget, the overall budget. So I think technology, data, all of these are centered in the United States. So I think these will drive changes. So US will continue to be important, and that's why US-India relationship, despite the turns and the twists, I think will be hinged on the ideas of technology, defense, security, and obviously on the under the larger umbrella of being core democratic countries.
Great. Thank you, Vivek, and all the best for your future projects, and hope your interest in US continue to help our scholars and policymakers.
Thank you, Portia. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.